I would like everyone to close your eyes and think of a person in your life who you have heard their life story before. What were y'all discussing? Was it about their childhood, or the most difficult moments in their life, or the happiest moments? Now open your eyes and keep that memory in mind. My interest in life stories of the elders began 2 years ago, around late July, early August. This is when I found out that my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. At first, I wasn't sure what was going on with the doctor's appointment or how far my grandmother's cancer has progressed. After a couple of weeks later, my mom sat me down and told me that the doctor said that my grandma only had 6 months to live. Hearing this news was shocking because I've never had a loved one close to me be diagnosed with a severe illness or were near close to passing away. And afterwards, I started thinking about the memories with my grandmother. I know that a majority of my childhood was being around her, like I'd stay at her house after school, or when my parents were working, or when she would walk me back to my house because I was scared to walk by myself, even though I only lived a street away. Also, I remember whenever we would walk, she would tell me to pick up cans that were around for them to be recycled. I know that I will mentally preserve these memories, but I also wanted to physically preserve the life story of my grandmother, so I could share it with future generations and for other relatives that I have. Therefore, this motivated me to hear the life stories from my grandmother and from other grandparents. This is my grandmother, from my mom's side. The first story I decided to hear was from my grandmother because of the situation we were in the past years. Growing up, she didn't have much. She had little memory of her as a kid because her parents would rarely let her go out to have fun with her friends or classmates because they would rather have her doing chores around the house at a young age. Her dad only allowed my grandma to go to school for a short period of time, so she was only able to complete first and second grade. So essentially, she basically just learned how to write her name and do a bit of math, because that's all her dad thought she would need to know. He rather had his sons continue their education because it will benefit them more in comparison to the females of the household. So in the future, when she had her kids, she worked hard to give her kids a better life than hers. Even though they lived in poverty, my grandma said that with working, she helped her children succeed more by furthering their education, like having them at least go or at least reach high school or finish high school. Although this may not seem much, it was more than what she received. Now in my family, my parents have pushed me to achieve a higher education and become a professional in any field I desire. This value is present in me since I know how important education is. I appreciate how this value was instilled in me because I understand how this isn't something I should take for granted, and it will allow me to grow. It has pushed me to be a better version of myself. So now the story of my grandfather, which is on the left. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away before I was born, so I wasn't able to sit down with him and have a firsthand hearing for his life story. However, that didn't stop me to uncover the memories of him. So my family rarely spoke of him. The only description I really knew about him was that he was an alcoholic. I decided first to speak with my mom about the memories she had with him, but she told me she could only remember just a few. She did recall at a young age he would come home after a long day at work and would call my mom and my uncle Ulises to the room and throw up the money he had earned that day and jokingly tell them that this is your money. My mom told me that she would stuff the money between the mattresses or hide them in another place so that in the next morning she could take that money. However, the next morning she couldn't find any of it. My grandfather was clever enough to pick up the money afterwards or check whether there was any leftovers, because if it was me, I would have lost a couple of dollars. I know another memory she recalled was how he was strict. During dinner time, he would have everybody sit down at the table and sit and eat together as a family. He would never take an excuse for someone to sit somewhere else to eat. This made me realize why my mom tells me that today. Although these memories are only a few memories, they're worth holding on to. I also decided to talk with my grandmother about him, if she could recall any memories of him. After she married my grandfather, she described their life as decent and nice. He cared deeply for his family and was a good man. However, after the death of my uncle Lisa's, he changed. He grieved by drinking more and more, which made him less of a good husband and bother to his family. Eventually, my grandmother decided to separate from him so he could not harm the family anymore. Even though my grandfather was an alcoholic and a harmful person, my grandmother kept repeating he was both good and bad, like he wasn't more than just the other. She didn't want me to picture him just as only a bad person. Although this may not be a complete life story, these snippets of memories of my grandfather allowed me to see him more than just an alcoholic. Even though the loss of a loved one can drastically change a person, we shouldn't forget who they were before. And so for our next stories. Although I wasn't present in hearing these stories, I was able to listen to them through an audio recording. This is an image of my friend's grandparents, Chema and Maria Gallegos. Now, I'd like to share Maria's story first. Her mother died when she was a baby, and her dad left her alone. She was raised by her mom's friends, and they owned a food store, and she never felt connected to them. She said she didn't have a family when she was younger, and she sold shoes with her caretakers. They sold shoes for large parties and events, and she would take the large baskets to the bus station, and the person who would charge her wouldn't charge her and even help her carry the heavy baskets. This occurred for 2 years, until they finally got together, and then they moved to the inner city after this, where they built a home. She was happy in the end because all she wanted was a family, and she finally got the chance to have one. She values family more than anything because she felt lost when she was younger, but now she lives with the intent to see her family grow and flourish. After hearing this story, it made me realize the value I hold to family. I know that I care and appreciate my family greatly because I see them as the ones who will always be there for me and do everything they can to see me succeed, and I would know that I would do it in return. Now for the next story is Chema's story. He was born into a very poor family of farmers. He didn't go to school since he would help out at the farm. His brother didn't go to school either. It was a very poor but humble life. He was happy with what he had because he knew it could be worse. He said life was very difficult, but he always had a positive mindset. He also said that you needed to be kind to everyone and humble to live a fulfilling life. He was able to meet Maria through his kindness and sense of goodwill. He was able to get a decent job through his good relationships with those around him. He is proud that he had no enemies and that he lived a great life because he was able to provide for his family. While his life wasn't wealthy in terms of materials, he saw how being kind allowed him for several blessings. Based on this story, it's important to be kind and humble to those around you because it can lead you to your greatness and give a fulfilling life, even if it isn't rich in materials. It's important to hold on to that with these new generations because it seems like we are trying to attain as much material to impress others. I learned to value the relationships and interactions I have with others since I know that how much a simple act of kindness can impact someone. So now, overall, elder stories are meaningful and impactful to share because they are filled with knowledge and wisdom that can be passed down from generation to generation. This spreads positivity and emphasizes the value of intergenerational bonds. When someone tells their story, they generally feel joyful knowing that they are being heard by someone they care for. Now, listening to the stories makes people more engaged and excited to continue these conversations. That is why I encourage you all to record and preserve elder stories because they are something meaningful to treasure and hold on to. Not only record them physically, but also record the stories in your mind so you can recall these memories vividly. Keep the stories alive for future generations because it will feel as if we will always be connected. Now think back to the stories you recalled in the beginning. What stories are still missing to hear? And what stories still need to be shared? Thank you.